exercised, because it was totally quiet for like 10 seconds, and then people started to talk. But we've all got a story, haven't we? We all have an experience of losing someone who was very close to us. I have many stories. The most recent one was of a young boy, Jacob. And he belonged to the Russ family, and some of you would know the Russ family. They went to this church at one time. And Jacob was a miracle baby. I mean, in every way, shape, or form. Doctors never expected him to survive delivery, never expected him to go home from the hospital, and Jacob proved them wrong. He went home from the hospital. He lived not for hours, but for days, not days, but weeks, months, and even years. He had severe mental and physical impairments that made his life very difficult. In particular, they meant that he couldn't really sit up on his own, and so he was more prone to pneumonia than the typical child. And I remember on occasions, more than one, where I held Jacob in his parents' home so they could just have a break, because they had a daughter as well, and life was hectic. And I'm convinced that oftentimes the only power that kept Jacob alive was the power of prayer and the love of his parents and his church family. And then at the age of about 4 years old, Jacob did die. And it really hit me in a personal way. And how could God take a child so young? And that wasn't even the biggest question. For me, the biggest question was, okay, the doctor said Jacob wasn't going to go home from the hospital. So why did God take the parents and this church family on this emotional roller coaster for not weeks or months, but years? I don't know. Well, from the lyrics of the song 42, it's clear that Chris Martin and his bandmates have experienced death at that personal level. I wonder who it was. The song opens with the phrase, "Those who are dead are not dead." And I think that's our first reaction when someone close to us dies, isn't it? It can't be. Not, she can't be dead. He can't be dead. No, life has to go on. And then the next phrase in the song presents a common response in our culture today. Maybe some of you have made this, maybe some of you believe this, maybe some of you have heard this when you've lost a loved one. Those who are dead are not dead, they're just living in my head. Right? Okay, they're not alive, there's not really an afterlife. I wish there was, but there isn't. But she's alive in my memory. And so long as the memory of her is alive and well in me, and I'm living my life according to the values and the morals and making decisions that I know she would have made, then she's still alive. Her memory lives on. It'd be like a Celine Dion song, right? Memory lives on. And somehow that's more comforting to us, isn't it, than the idea that those who are dead are just dead. We think, okay, well, maybe they're not alive anymore, but they're alive in my memory. And then the next phrase, those who are dead are not dead, they're just living in my head. And since I fell for that spell, I'm living there as well. The writer can't bring himself to the point of accepting that his loved one is alive only in the sense of being alive in his mind, in his memory. He's not going to buy that idea. In fact, he calls it a spell. A spell that those who would not viva la vida, a spell that those who would accept the half-life need to live by. But not him, not Chris Martin, not his bandmates. No, those who are dead are not dead, and they're more than just alive in your head. I think that's what he's saying here. Now, in spite of all the ambiguity in this song, one thing is for certain. The next phrase. They reveal a certainty. Time is so short, and I'm sure, there's the certainty, that there must be something more. Time is so short, and I'm sure there must be something more. Time is short, isn't it? And I think this is my personal reflection. I mean, this is just Daryl here. That's where I think they got the title 42 from. If you invert those two numerals, you get 24, which is the number of hours in a day. And I think this song is a reflection on the brevity of life, Our days are so fleeting. We spend our entire lifetimes trying to grow in wisdom and trying to grow in understanding and trying to grow our character. And all the while we're growing older ourselves. And then just when it starts to make sense, go back to the video we watched, just when we feel like we're inserting that last piece of the puzzle, we're getting near the finish, we reach the finish line ourselves. We expire. We meet death. And it seems like such a waste. It seems like such a waste, and it doesn't feel right, nor should it. I want to read from Ecclesiastes again, this time from chapter 3, verse 11, where God's word says this: God, the Creator, has planted eternity in the human heart. God has planted eternity in your heart and in mine. I think this verse is important because it helps us confront one of Satan's lies. That's right, we're going to talk about a few of Satan's lies this morning. And lie number one is this: if God has put eternity on people's hearts, they're certainly not looking for it. Maybe you are because you're here this morning. But by and large, people aren't looking for eternity. And that's a lie, because the truth is that's wrong. People are. People are looking, whether they realize it or not. People are looking, whether they acknowledge it or not. So life must continue after death, says Chris Martin. But in what manner? What's it look like? That's the next question that the song addresses. What happens to our loved ones when they die? What happens to us when we die? And so Chris muses further. It's almost like he's talking to his loved one. He says, you thought you might be a ghost. A ghost, you know, is someone who hasn't found their final resting place. And again, that's a popular idea today. Thanks to Patrick Swayze. That when people die, they become ghosts. And I think human beings prefer this idea to the idea that when someone dies, they're expired, they're gone. We don't know about heaven, we don't know about hell, purgatory, whatever, but this idea of people becoming ghosts, that's appealing to many. Next phrase. You didn't get to heaven, but you made it close. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it? I think that's the clearest line in the song. It's this whole idea that if there is a heaven, I probably won't get there because I haven't lived a good enough life. So maybe I'll end up somewhere else. Maybe I'll end up as a ghost. Maybe there's this middle place, a purgatory or something. And that's kind of where the song ends. It doesn't resolve the issue of death. And that brings us to Satan's second lie. Satan's number 2 lie is this: that death is an issue that isn't meant to be resolved. So when it comes to death, believe what you want. You can believe what you want, and he can believe what he wants, and she can believe what she wants, and you can believe what you want, and I can believe what I want, as long as it works for you. Whatever works for you. But it doesn't really matter. And that's a lie, friends, because what we believe about the afterlife does matter. It makes a difference. It makes a difference in how we live this life. This past June, Chris Martin was interviewed and featured on the cover of Rolling Stone. And in the interview, some of you may have read this, Chris comments on his religious upbringing. And I quote, "I grew up with the prospect of heaven and hell looming ever large. What I grew up with was, if you even think about boobs, you're going to hell." Which might explain why they have a picture from Eugene Delacroix with a woman whose boob is exposed. I don't know. It was drilled in. These things are wrong. It was black and white. As a kid, you don't know any better. But then as you go on, the cracks begin to appear and you're like, I'm not sure about this hell thing. Now when I read that interview, and I reflected on what Chris says here, in light of his upbringing, it makes perfect sense to me that he's not sure what he thinks about hell. It makes perfect sense to me that he would consider himself a seeker, that he's not committed to any one spirituality or faith. It makes sense to me, given his upbringing, that he has criticism of the Church of Jesus Christ.